saved for Animals. I do not like the Animals album. While touring for the Animals album cycle, you know, the Pink Floyd album I don't like. Hi, I'm Abby. I finally bought a plain black t-shirt, and this is me eating crow. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If 30-minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Okay, kids. We need to talk. For the entirety of this channel's history, I have said I do not like this week's album. I was fully prepared to make another episode of I Don't Like. I had so many great one-liners in the bag, and then this week actually happened. Well, you won. Here you go. This week's album is Pink Floyd, Animals. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls where sometimes you can pick what's on the show. I make announcements when I'm places that aren't here, like my podcast, which will be posting a new episode this Friday. You can find all of that on my channel. Alright, let's take the plastic off. I have no idea what my lighting situation is going to do to this glossy cover this week. I am so sorry. So my copy is, to my knowledge, an original or a very early repress. Let's waste no time this week. Let's talk about this cover art. Designed by who else? Hypnosis, Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell. In atypical fashion for Hypnosis, the front cover concept came from a member of the band. In typical Roger Waters fashion, he had an insane idea: to fly a giant pig balloon over the Battersea Power Station. A flying pig is a stark image as is, but Raj liked how industrial the power plant looked. He relayed the idea to Storm and Aubrey, who'd already presented a few unsuccessful drafts. I imagine the conversation went something a little like, hey man, we don't actually need to fly a pig balloon over the power. Fuck you. Fuck you. I already commissioned a 30-foot tall balloon for the tour. We're flying my goddamn pig. Well, they didn't actually fly the pig. Roger wasn't up there in his little Red Baron outfit. This guy was more of a combination of a Zeppelin and a Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade balloon. Piggy in tow, the guys, oink Floyd if you will, plus Hypnosis, 24 photographers, a film crew inside a helicopter, and a marksman with a sniper rifle to shoot the pig down in case it flew away, hauled out to Battersea on December 2nd, 1976, and the pig won't blow up. Day 2, the whole crew hauls back out to Battersea for a reshoot. Well, almost the whole crew. Floyd's manager forgot to call the marksman. The crew was like, it's fine, the wind isn't that strong. What could possibly go wrong? God, what I would give to be working air traffic at Heathrow that day. Take 3, the whole crew goes to Battersea again with 2 marksmen this time for good measure, and the photos are too good. They threw in the towel, superimposed Dear Piggy onto a cloudy sky, and this is what we got. Ominous, dystopian, polluted, barren. Themes enforced by the gatefold. Detail shots of the power plant from day 1 of Pig Odyssey. And on this inner sleeve, Insert, we have all our lyrics. I almost said Pink Floyd again, On Animals, we have the classic era lineup of Pink Floyd. That's Roger Waters on vocals, bass, some guitar, manning tape loops and vocoder, and serving as principal songwriter. David Gilmour on guitar, co-lead vocals with Raj on Dogs and the Talk Box. Allegedly, he's the one playing bass on Pigs and Sheep. He's listed as doing so in the 2018 remix's liner notes, though this is hotly contested. Rick Wright on piano, Hammond organ, Rhodes, a Farfisa, synths including the Mini Moog and some percussion, and Nick Mason on drums. We have a special guest, Snowy White, on guitar for Pigs on the Wing. Kind of. He is on the album, just not my version of the album. More on this later. Animals was produced by Pink Floyd, engineered by Brian Humphries. Roll transition. We begin our story today in early 1976, a few months after Floyd released their 9th studio album, Wish You Were Here. Their expression of disillusionment with the music industry following their international breakout, Dark Side of the Moon. In a lot of ways, Wish You Were Here was an expression of frustration at having to follow up this unfollow-upable album. Dark Side is regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time. How the f*** do you follow up a record which critics have described as one of mankind's greatest achievements? It's me, I'm Critics. We also can't forget Wish You Were Here was Roger laying some of his trauma to rest surrounding the mental decline of former band leader and childhood best friend Syd Barrett. It might not be appropriate to have a big flashy tour for something so deeply personal. So they didn't. Pink Floyd didn't gig at all in '76, but they didn't stop working. They had a few tracks left over from Wish You Were Here sessions with working titles You've Gotta Be Crazy, and Raving and Drooling. When considering how the musical landscape changed in Floyd's absence, this line from Don McLean's modern epic American Pie comes to mind. While the king was looking down, the jester stole his thorny crown. In Floyd's absence, something pretty fucking major happened. Punk killed Pink Floyd. So what is punk? People agonize and nitpick over the definition nowadays. At its core, punk came from industrial working class neighborhoods. It championed self-sufficiency, self-efficacy, passion over skill or form, and singing about the realities of where you came from. Starting from the very beginning here, if you're from New York, it means dragging a chair across the floor and breaking glass while you sing about heroin ravaging your artist's haven. If you're from Detroit, it either means playing Vox Beatle amps until they're billowing blue smoke as you shout about the honkies, or slathering yourself in peanut butter? If anyone's made sense of Iggy Pop, please, by all means, write into the show. And a few years down the line, if you're from Manchester, Brixton, Birmingham, it means you are pissed at the state of your country. You're writing God Save the Queen about how out of touch the monarchy is. Parliament isn't much better. Or you might get caught up in the Notting Hill Carnival riots, wind up in The Clash, and write White Riot about police brutality and dire living conditions. To these guys, kids really, prog and stadium rock were a facet of the establishment. The man. The pop bands were maybe anti-establishment in '68 or '69, but this is 1976. In those 7 or 8 years, those guys got rich and famous. Flying around on private jets, riding in limos, dressing their wives and groupies in furs, building their own studios to release their own music on their own vanity labels. A lot of these big groups were on an island. Pink Floyd was one of the biggest of the bunch, one of the biggest acts of the '70s, second only to the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin. Through a punk lens, Floyd were dinosaurs. As uncool could get. Floyd became the target of the punks' ire to the point where the Sex Pistols were wearing I Hate Pink Floyd t-shirts. All that being said, no, Animals is not Pink Floyd's response to punk. I don't know where people get that from. Here's Nick stating the connection was subconscious at best. Quote, "We probably would be affected by the punk issue, even though we never discussed it. However, around the time of Animals' production, the Damned calls up Floyd's publishers asking for Syd Barrett to produce an album. They're like, yeah, Syd's not in the state to be working right now. How would you boys like working with another member of Pink Floyd? Yeah, let's get you set up." They hark the most experienced of the bunch, Nick Mason, and that's how we got Music for Pleasure. What Animals is Roger's response to the current state of Britain, the same issues that birthed punk rock. Insert all the Animal Farm stuff here, you already know it, so there's no use in reiterating. What I will say is the primary reason Dogs was rewritten was because You Gotta Be Crazy was way too wordy. Animals was recorded at Britannia Row Studio in London. Floyd built Britannia specifically to record Animals, and then never used it again. They did use it on The Wall and the David Gilmour's Pink Floyd stuff, but never again in Floyd's history was Britannia the primary studio. That might have something to do with the fidelity of the album it produced. It was so gnarly that they overhauled the whole thing 40 years later. So why were the guys out of Abbey Road if it worked so well for them on the past few records? Okay, so remember the Piper video when I mentioned Floyd had unlimited studio time and therefore a lot of freedom over the music they made? They had that because they took a pay cut on their percentage of album sales. After Wish You Were Here, that deal expired. Floyd could make way more money on their records now, but they couldn't dilly-dally and spend unlimited money to make it happen anymore. The guys were like, "Fuck you, EMI, we still want to watch Monty Python while we record," and built Britannia. The guys had this tremendous weight off their shoulders following the cathartic Wish You Were Here. The atmosphere of Animals was a lot more relaxed, so much so that Raj had a pool table brought in. But recording itself was a lot more separate. This new studio was a lot closer to the guys' homes than EMI was. Naturally, they spent more time with family than with each other. As for writing material, that was about 100% less chill than recording it. Animals was, by all accounts, the dawn of the Roger Waters show. This album, plus the two follow-ups, would be the apex of Roger's presence in, or dominance over, Pink Floyd. That wasn't just a problem creatively, it was a problem financially. Whoever was listed as the song's writers got a little extra in royalties. So when Raj split up Pigs on the Wing to bookend the album, David was pissed. This wasn't like Shine On You Crazy Diamond, where it had to be split up to account for the limitations of the vinyl format. While yes, Pigs on the Wing split up does work better for the theme, Raj got double the royalties for what is effectively one song. Super unfair when there's only one other co-writer listed on one song on the entire album. But in Raj's defense, no one else had substantial material to contribute. David was entering a new stage in his life. He's enjoying married life with Ginger, and he's become a dad for the first time. As for Rick, my boy was in the exact opposite situation as David. Rick's marriage is in shambles, and he's just too anxious and depressed right now to be writing. Here's what he had to say about that period. Quote, "I didn't fight very hard to put my stuff on. I think I played well, but I didn't contribute to the writing it. But I also think that Roger wasn't letting me do that. The band is starting to come apart at the seams, but they knew these arrangements would require an extra man on deck, for the tour at the very least. Which, surprise, surprise, Raj was already orchestrating. Enter Snowy White. He rolls up to the audition, all goes well. By divine timing, as Snowy is leaving Britannia, Roger and Nick are silently freaking the fuck out behind the board. What did they do? While working on Pigs on the Wing, they somehow lost David's solo? How do you lose a guitar solo?
You forget to cherish her.
This is a physical media show, remember? Well, Snowy's solo only made it onto the 8-track version of Animals, the original. That's because of the format's limitations. Pigs on the Wing was combined into one song with Snowy's solo as a nice fat piece of flex tape. The track listing of this Animals goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Pigs on the Wing 1, and closing side 1, we have Dogs. Opening up side 2, we have Pigs, 3 different ones, followed by Sheep, and the album closes with Pigs on the Wing 2. Animals was released in January of 1977 in the UK, February in the US, and critical reception was very mixed at first. NME hailed it to the high heavens, Rolling Stone not so much. Speaking of things Rolling Stone did not like, in lieu of singles, because let's be real, there is not one viable single on Animals, it was promoted by a massive stadium tour called the In the Flesh tour. Yeah, the tour was fucking cursed. Specifically the US leg. Europe went fine, but the American leg into Canada was one of rock and roll's great comedy of errors. For one, Raj came down with allegedly maybe hepatitis in Philly and played that whole gig heavily medicated. He was so whacked out, I have no idea how he could even hold his bass, let alone play it. Not so comfortably numb. Jesus, rough crowd. The show was plagued by technical difficulties. The crew didn't have CCTV monitors to see what was happening on stage, so they had to rely on the intercom system, which worked about as well as the McDonald's ice cream machine. So as the show got more and more complex and more inflatables were added to keep stadium-sized audiences engaged, more cues would be missed. That pissed Roger right off. Sometimes the crew would be subject to his bullying, but it was mostly Rick. It got so bad Rick flew home, Floyd's manager had to beg him to stay on the road. The quadraphonic sound system was a mess. The band couldn't hear each other, having to resort to wearing headsets. Stadium crews had no idea how to work the system, not to mention the stadium's PA would be running at the same time. The two were almost never synced. You thought the pig antics were done? Wrong. The added attractions Rolling Stone so hated were sometimes combined with pyrotechnics. If the city or venue okayed it, a stunt piggy would be pumped up with helium and propane and set alight at the end of Pigs. But on June 15th, 1977, the pyro team decided to add a little bit of spice to it. They inflated Evil Pig Knievel with a combo of acetylene and oxygen, two way more flammable gases than helium and propane. Instead of a brilliant fireball in the sky, 60,000 people at the Milwaukee County Stadium witnessed a fucking explosion, which rained down fiery debris on the parking lot and the stage, narrowly missing the band. Inflatable piggy go boom indeed. The guys were also fined about $7,700 in today's money for flying their private jet too low over the stadium in Cleveland. So there's that. Promoters tried to stiff Floyd by about 30,000 seat sales at Soldier Field in Chicago. The court case wouldn't be settled until 1983, with those promoters convicted of mail fraud. This is all going on while Norton Warburg was actively embezzling all the money Floyd made off Darkseid right under their noses. God, imagine being Snowy White in 1977. You're the new guy, and your first tour with Floyd, you're getting a front row seat to all this mess? All the while, Raj was isolating himself more and more. He'd stay in a different hotel by himself. He'd always be the last to roll up for sound check and the first to leave. I love moments like this on the series. Very rarely does one episode's timeline leave off exactly where another starts. If not for this tour and the events of closing night on July 6th, we would not have Animal's follow-up album. The Montreal show was cursed from the start. It was the last night of tour, so excited fans showed up hours early. Plenty of time to get drunk and high. Raj hated this. He spent so much time on this show and he wanted the fans to experience it, not make it a frat party with a giant pig balloon. Your frontman in a terrible mood, plus a bunch of drunk assholes waiting hours for the band to go on, minus an opening act to keep them busy. It's a recipe for disaster. It would have most any band ending an otherwise successful, though chaotic, tour on a bad night, and that's exactly what happened to Floyd in Montreal. It all came to a head when someone set off fireworks at the beginning of Pigs on the Wing, then another tried to climb on stage during Pigs. In a move that would go down in rock and roll history, Roger Waters spat on the stage lunging fan. Insert the
Build a wall between himself and the audience.
line here, cue the greatest rock opera ever written. Meanwhile, David and Rick begin work on their first solo albums, self-titled and Wet Dream respectively. In the time since its release, Animals has gone from the somewhat underrated installment of the classic quadrilogy to a fan favorite, enjoying a mass reappraisal following the overhauled 2018 mix. So, what do I think of this Animals? Going in, I love Pink Floyd, okay? I love Pink Floyd. I fucking love Pink Floyd! So, needless to say, I was around for the mass reappraisal of this week's album. Over the years, I'd only thrown Animals on my turntable a fraction of the times I've listened to the other 3 installments of Floyd's Golden Run. Where'd I put Darkseid? Where'd I put Wish You... Jesus, I have... there's so many! Why did I do that? Oh, this is gonna suck to clean up. Wish You Were Here is my favorite Floyd album. I am inextricably tied to its themes. I have lived this album. There was a period of like 3 months in my life where I listened to The Wall at least once a day. I ride hard for The Wall. And I genuinely believe Dark Side of the Moon is one of mankind's greatest achievements. Animals just wasn't there. There was some hope woven into Darkseid, while Wish You Were Here was approaching the zenith of Floyd's mainstream power. It was also the beginning of their most doom and gloom period. The subject matter of their albums got progressively darker until the darkest Floyd album, which I argue as the first Roger Waters solo album, The Final Cut. Final Cut is midnight. Animals is leaning towards the light, but you know there's something lurking out in them there trees. And this was their first album after laying their Sid trauma to rest. How do they move forward? First things first, the Animal Farm thing. I read Animal Farm in high school. Aside from the presence of sheep, dogs, and pigs, this thing bears hardly any resemblance to Animal Farm. The book is a commentary on the then extant Soviet Union. The album is a commentary on Western capitalism. capitalism. Ergo, a lot of people miss the central theme of Animals. It's not just society, man. 7-minute guitar solo with some pig noises. It's capitalism, man. 7-minute guitar solo with some pig noises. There are some things about Animals that I still can't get past. For one, the mix is whack. It's not a walk in the park for any band to produce themselves. Floyd had a better grip on it than most groups, but they didn't have an Alan Parsons around, and you can tell. This was kind of amended with the 2018 mix. I won't spend too much time on it since I don't have it on vinyl, and this is a vinyl channel. I will say it's very bright, especially on the guitar. I really noticed the difference in the quiet bits. I hadn't realized how whacked out the fidelity of the original was until I compared both Pigs on the Wings. I have to say the drums were generally a little too prominent for my taste, but if you're a Nick Mason girly, congratulations for getting such a Nick-forward mix. I find he often gets lost in the shuffle. Anyway, overall, it's pretty rich that Raj is here bitching about the man when he married into the British aristocracy. My brother in Christ, you are the man. What Floyd did best in my eyes was collaboration. It's what makes Echoes the best Pink Floyd song. Although yes, Raj was at the helm for Dark Side and Wish You Were Here, the guys could still build off each other and transform one thing into another and then another. Pink goes from green to blue to orange to violet and then back again. By the time Animal Sessions rolled around, the camaraderie was not there anymore, and even before I did my research, I could feel it on this record. On my first pass, side 1 made me angry. Not at the injustices of the world, pigs and dogs and all that, but at Pink Floyd for wasting my time. Never in my life have I felt this way after side 1 of an album, let alone a Floyd album. Raj's statements were wishy-washy. Anything meaningful he tried to say was mauled by the music. Ideas were not elaborated upon enough, and the song structure was slop. Then I did something I don't normally have the time to do. I carved out 128 extra minutes to do some homework. To better understand this thing's musical DNA, I listened to this thing, and this thing back to back to back to identify what elements were carried over from Dark Side and Wish You Were Here, what was left behind, and what was brought forward for The Wall. After I did the extra credit, this is what I found. Firstly, wow, there are some really prominent callbacks to Animals on the Wall that I completely missed before. I don't have much to say about the first Pigs on the Wing. It's nondescript as far as openers from this era of Floyd go. Perhaps the weakest. There's no grand overture, no perfectly orchestrated build, no plane crash either. Instead, we have Roger Waters warning the listener of what happens when we get lost in boredom, pain, and blame. First, we meet the dogs of the world, cunning, aggressive, self-destructive creatures. I gotta say, having a fade-in on a Floyd song is unusual. It augments my feeling that Dogs has a rough musical takeoff. The elements are there, Raj and Nick's tasteful rhythm bass layer, David at the forefront, and a driving rhythm acoustic part, and Rick in the middle, kicking ass all over the place, with subtle flourishes and textural lines, but it doesn't quite mesh together. Dogs have all the social graces of kings, with nice handshakes, making all the right moves, the wolf in sheep's clothing. But just underneath the wool of their suits are savage animals.
She said the thing!
You have to be trusted by the people you lie to, so when they turn their backs on you, you'll get the chance to put the knife in.
So I was supposed to have my dog in this part of the video. I had a great bit written. It appears that I've trained him too well because he won't come in here. No toys, no little sheepies, nothing will lure him inside. Good boy? I guess.
I see these first few verses as coming from the head of the pack. The old dog telling the young dog how it's gonna be. You're gonna chew people up and spit them out, step on whoever you have to get by, and in the end, it's gonna mean nothing. You'll be just another sad old man all alone and dying of cancer from all the cigs you smoked in the office. The echo effects on David's vocals and Raj's maniacal laughter buried deep in the mix are super cool. It's disorienting, like running from a pack of dogs in the woods. The cackles come from everywhere. Paranoia sets in. The composition starts to come together when Rick gets to bust out some lead lines, but it's disrupted by that iconic... It might even come into the fray prematurely. We snap back the rubber band a little too soon. Another attempt at takeoff is made after the first instrumental break, in which Raj introduces the next core motif. This attempt goes better. David really is the MVP of this song. He's usually known for being a very fluid, airy soloist. I love when he gets some grit in his style. In both vocal performance and his guitar work, he influences dogs with its emotion, anger, resentment, desperation, the doom of dragged down by the stone. Note Raj's lyrical tendency to start a sentence with "and when." And when you lose control. I instantly thought of Brain Damage and When Your Head Explodes. 8 minutes in and things start to get really good. It's dark, desolate, immersive synth mania that Rick deserved a writing credit for. And the manipulation of the dog bark sample with the vocoder, genius. The thing about Nick's playing style is you don't notice how much he fills a tune until he pulls back. Sparse kicks, sparse snare, gradually filling it in with cymbal punctuates this otherwise unstructured movement. Now the young dog has grown old himself and has had an epiphany. Gotta admit that I'm a little bit confused. Sometimes it seems to me as if I'm just being used. I haven't seen many other critics point this out. The only group Raj makes an effort to humanize are the dogs. Born in a house full of pain, fitted with collar and chain, given a pat on the back, a stranger at home, and finally, our old man meets the same fate as Joe Keller and Willie in Death of a Salesman. You can't help but feel bad for the guy. It's kind of cool that the vocal duties were handed off to go from young dog to old dog. David's got the softer, younger voice. Raj's has always been a little harsher, thinner, rougher around the edges. Might have something to do with all that inhale screaming. God, this verse is a clunker lyrics-wise. Keep on pretending that everyone's expendable and no one has a real friend. Really, Raj? You wrote Dark Side and that's the best you could come up with? Thankfully, the instrumental takes over and finally all of the kinks are ironed out. This absolutely weird and ugly mercilessly punts us into the resolution. It makes much more sense the last time around. We had a rough takeoff there, but well done, boys, you stuck the landing. Musically, Pigs is my favorite of the bunch. It's got the same smarmy swagger as Have a Cigar. The gluttons, the slobs, the ones in this world with fuck you money. Pigs, 3 different ones. A CEO, an Iron Lady, and the puritanical Pearl Clutcher. Although what hinders this song is Raj's very personal feelings towards these 3. Dogs was less personally attached of a commentary. My second biggest qualm with Pigs, and one of my biggest problems with this whole album really, is the straight use of animal noises. It was cool when we forged and warped them in Dogs, and here too, but it's just too on the nose otherwise. It makes me feel like the guys maybe weren't as confident in the narrative as the fans were. My biggest problem? The talk box. This is peak quirked up white boy activity, not unlike a deranged Lindsey Buckingham doing push-ups on Not That Funny. But the talk box is literally one of the worst things to ever happened to rock and roll. It's the wah-wah, but without any of the charm. It's grating, it's self-indulgent, it's Bon Jovi-ass nonsense that I will not stand for. Congratulations, David, for killing the vibe with that mess. Despite those blips in the equation, Floyd fires on all cylinders through Pigs. The bumps in the road are ground down for now. The guys are functioning as a unit again. A pin-thin razor/synth grants entry to the ominous synth loop. Whoever's on bass makes fuller use of the fretboard, rhythm guitar scratches, and darkly theatrical piano. Indulgent full keyboard swaths nick on a fat funky saunter. There's a cowbell! I want to get drunk at karaoke and kill the vibe by singing Pigs. Raj makes a serious case for this one. You can tell he got super into it, flexing his theater kid side with woos and heavy breathing and sloshing through the slop. It's utterly ridiculous. Pigs is rounded out by my favorite musical moment on the record, with everyone driving full steam ahead through the muck. Whoever is doing an awesome cleanup of the fretboard on bass, props to him, and David sets fire to the barn on guitar, but not without sneaking in his comfort riff. Every guitarist has one. Finally, we have a crossfade on animals, pigs into sheep, and you guessed it, more barnyard noises. This song condemns those who lack critical thinking skills, those who stick their heads in the sand, turn a blind eye to the real aggressors of the world. They fear the dogs, though the dogs are too busy cannibalizing themselves to herd the sheep. It's the way Raj chose to write this that intrigues me. I have looked over Jordan, I have seen things are not what they seem. Is the atheist getting biblical on us? Yes, he is. I had to pull out the lyrics sheet for this one, but the heavily obscured vocoder part is a twisted up, Floydified Bible verse. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me down to lie in pastures green. He maketh me to hang on hooks in high places. He converteth me to lamb cutlets. This is dark. Laugh out loud funny in some f***ed up way. How did Floyd not get flamed for this? It's like if the twisted creations of the Wool associate Gerald Scarf tried their hand at writing the Psalms. When cometh the day we lowly ones, through quiet reflection and great dedication, master the art of karate. Musically, Rick is the MVP on Sheep. Unfortunately, this is another moment where the guys lose grip on their chemistry. There's lots of incongruous elements and banging about. They don't ever quite mesh together for me, and it fades out before any of the ideas are fully explored. Although I do really dig the reappearance of David's stone vocal loop, it's a really cool tie-in to Dogs. It fits with their reappearance on Sheep. Pigs on the Wing 2 was intended to be hopeful, but after we've had the wool ripped from our eyes, I don't totally trust you know that I care what happens to you. That aside, Pigs on the Wing 2 might be the most important message of all right now. As you guys probably know, I am a dumb American, and this election cycle for us is gonna be gnarly no matter what. You youngins in the audience, if this is your first election cycle as an eligible voter, I am so sorry. It's pretty bad, but it's not the worst it could be, because no matter how this thing goes, the best thing we can do is stick to our friends and our family and our loved ones like glue and work on bettering our immediate community first. This is the same realization Floyd's generation had in the mid-70s. When Animals was released, it had been 10 years since the optimistic, heady summer of love. Floyd's career trajectory expertly articulated this generational loss of innocence and turning from the collective to the self, while still keeping an eye on what's going on in the barn, of course. I think this is why Zoomer Floyd fans like myself are so rabid, because we're getting to the age where we get what they're putting down. Raj pushes my buttons. He frustrates me to hell, and that's why I dig his stuff. He may be a preachy, egotistical mega jerk. He may engage in needlessly petty bullshit with his ex-bandmates and their wives. He may have made the literal worst Redux ever made. God, I wish I had the time last October to talk about how terrible this was, but Raj is clearly a very smart man with something to say. His timeless statements mean as much to me at age 13 as they do now at 25, and they'll keep aging with me. I'll be going on 28 when the inevitable 50th anniversary re-release of Animals rolls around. I'd be willing to reevaluate this thing then. Raj comes up with high concept stuff, from the music to the tours and everything in between, and damn can he execute it. I'm not really a fan of him as a person, but as an artist, I do respect him. It took some extra grease on the wheel, but in time, the floating bits of the proverbial flaming pig have started to melt into something. David doesn't consider Animals to be a creative apex for Floyd, and neither do I. The music isn't as strong as it could be, but the performances share a fiery conviction, with David at the head of the pack for standout contributions. The compositions aren't as organized as they could be. I generally feel like this needed more time in the oven. But the guys are taking full advantage of moving out of Daddy EMI's place for the first time, pulling wacky sonic manipulations and layering in excess. The thematic content isn't as fleshed out as it could be, but Raj dips his toe into being a performer, voicing different characters. There are just as many lyrical stinkers as there are jaw-dropping gems. I still don't hold this thing in as high regard as its brothers, but I do see its merits. Artistically, creatively, and personally, this was an important turning point for Pink Floyd. Intentional or not, this ensured them a space in the radically changing musical future, however brief of a time that would be. Animals wasn't necessarily the album I wanted, but it's the album Pink Floyd needed. My personal favorites off this one are Dogs and Pigs. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That's the album I turned around on. That was Pink Floyd's Animals, and with the end of this video, I closed the book on reviewing Pink Floyd's classic period. Like my reviews of Led Zeppelin, every time I've reviewed Floyd, it's acted as a marker for where this series is, where I am as a critic, creator, and music listener. But where all my Zeppelin episodes are up for Redux someday, 3 out of these 4 albums are unreduxable. As far as video making goes, I can't go back to this period of Floyd. Dark Side 50th was one of the best episodes of season 2. Blind Faith got the smoke Dark Side deserved. The Wall, that video is one of my greatest hits. As for Wish You Were Here, it's kind of a shame I covered this when I did. Unless Fantano were to invite me on board for a Classics Week installment someday, or otherwise when pigs learn to fly, I will never redux this. Emotionally, can't go back there. Sorry. What do you think of Animals? What do you think of Pink Floyd? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11, and a new episode of my podcast will be up Friday at noon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!